Welcome to Afterthoughts, everybody. This is the podcast where we watch a movie and we tell you our thoughts afterward. I am your host, Michael Dixon. With me, as always, Ryan King.
Hey, how's it going? I think there's got to be something behind why you picked this. You got to put the things together, put all the little pieces together, it all comes together. You've been planning it for so long.
It's a riddle wrapped in an enigma. It's a mystery.
Wrapped in a bad wig.
A mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma. And John Garcia.
Hey, everybody. You know, I have a theory that JFK's brain, when it disappeared, was actually put into a Frankenstein's monster of Jimmy Hoffa's body.
Oh.
So, I mean, it makes
Hoffa
the most
would have
logical
hated that.
sense. Yeah.
And sent to Cuba, like all of it.
He wore shorts to a meeting. That guy was Hoffa Kennedy. Anyways, yeah, you have to be here.
Great. All right. As you may have guessed, we are talking about Oliver Stone's 1991 film, JFK.
If I answer that question you keep asking, if I give you the name of the big enchilada, you know, then it's Bon Voyage Dino. I mean like permanent. I mean like a bullet in my head, you dig? Does that help you see my problem a little better?
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of light in the bushes, and then shots rang out.
No cloak and dagger stuff, you know. They called it Operation Mongoose.
It's gonna be okay, Dave. You just talk to us on the record and we'll protect you. Now, I guarantee it.
You're so naive.
We found this in your office. We think the conference room is also bugged, maybe the phones.
I'm not cooperating here. Listen, there's a death warrant for me.
Are the same people gonna kill us, Pop?
Nobody's gonna kill us. Y'all gotta get into your minds how the hell the spooks think. Now, they're not ordinary crooks. Think the unthinkable. Question everything. Now, we're through the looking glass here, people. White is black, and black is white. You don't believe me?
I don't know.
All this time, you never believed me.
I just want to raise our children and live a normal life. I want my life back.
Look, this thing's bigger than all of us.
Now, how many courts is it gonna take for you lawyers to figure out what you want?
People got to know. People got to know why he was killed.
You know what you done to me? I'm a dead man!
Well, if they can kill the president, they can certainly get me.
You're a mouse fighting a gorilla.
You're close. You're closer than you think.
There's going to be an attempt to kill you somewhere between here and New Orleans.
I say let justice be done over heaven's fall.
Starring Kevin Costner as Louisiana District Attorney, or New Orleans District Attorney, Jim Garrison, Gary Oldman, Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, Wayne Knight, Joe Pesci, Ed Asner, Vincent D'Onofrio, Sissy Spacek, Brian Doyle Murray, Michael Rooker, Laurie Metcalf, pretty much everybody in Hollywood. John fucking Candy, like there's
they all came together.
Everyone in the Screen Actors Guild in 1991 is in this movie. Kevin Bacon, Tommy Lee Jones, so many fucking people.
And they all did terrible accents.
Yes.
I wanted to pick this movie because if you have not been paying attention to the news lately, or if you are just incapable of following what has happened in the before the last 24 hours, because we live in an insane world, Donald Trump was shot in the ear at a presidential rally a few weeks ago when this comes out.
Now there's conspiracies about that.
Oh, interesting. Ryan's playing the conspiracy. Trump planted the Tarantino blood pack on his ear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He blades. I've seen it.
Yeah. So that made me really want to watch this movie and talk about it. Also, my girlfriend and I recently, on a trip to Dallas, went to the Sixth Floor Museum, and so a lot of things coalescing around this. I thought this seems like a good time to discuss this film. So, Oliver Stone is a really interesting filmmaker. He fought in Vietnam and came out of that experience really jaded and, kind of became a leftist activist filmmaker. And a lot of his movies are talking about kind of the problems at the core of America with Platoon and Born on the 4th of July and JFK. Like he's getting at a lot of the systemic problems with the country. And I think the JFK assassination is just such an interesting microcosm of a lot of the things that are just terribly wrong with the country that nobody really wants to talk about and are kind of just not as obvious as some other more blatant problems. Like people think about, like we're so divided and, the problems are between ourselves as people, but it's like, the government is run by people in a back room, as we all know because Joe Biden can barely speak one sentence, but somehow things are happening. So I think this is a really interesting movie to kind of analyze the country and where we are today and where we've come since World War II and all this stuff, as well as, the situation with Trump and all of that. I think this is a fascinating movie to dive into. So JFK takes place in 1963 through 1969 or so, following Jim Garrison, who is a New Orleans district attorney, and he is trying to figure out what happened to JFK. It starts out that it's reported that Lee Harvey Oswald had some associates in New Orleans. He does a little digging, talks to some people. It doesn't lead anywhere. He, passes some information on to the FBI. They say, yeah, we couldn't really find anything from this. Case closed. He kind of forgets about it and moves on. Then 3 years later, he kind of gets pulled back into it and starts to realize that he missed a lot of details earlier on, and he needs to figure this out and dive deeper into it. And so he brings his team of assistant DAs into the case and tries to figure out what's going on. That leads to a massive unraveling of this huge government plot and a lot of questions that are still unanswered today. I think like this is such an entertaining movie, but it's so incredibly well researched and put together. Like this is it's very factual in what it's trying to do. Like all these people were real. These types of conversations were happening at this time. This is a real case in New Orleans. And I think it's a fascinating way to kind of tell a historical event through kind of unraveling a mystery. And it almost feels like Stone's version of like Goodfellas, complete with Joe Pesci in a weird role as well.
Joe Pesci also gets made in this one.
Yeah, freaks out and gets made, yeah.
But you have this really fast-paced editing and this camera movement, and it really pulls you into the story and really gets you invested in these characters. I think this movie is pretty incredible. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say, but also just the impact on the culture that this movie has made through like literally Congress made a special commission after this movie came out to further investigate JFK's assassination, to review all of the classified documents and release more of that information. We still have a lot of information that is classified and redacted that we don't know. Trump famously said that he was going to release all of it, and then he looked at it and said, no, this is too dangerous. We can't release this. So that was very disappointing. But yeah, I think this is it's a fascinating story. I'm really excited to get into it. Ryan, what did you think of JFK?
Yeah, this is a mixed bag a bit for me. I think because being jaded in general kind of just makes me sit here and roll my eyes through all of it. But it is a really well-made movie. It is well acted. I'm sure we'll joke about Louisiana accents, but there's honestly pretty good job. There's some not so great ones. A little over the top. But I think that I've just found when I watch stuff like this or things about cults that I'm just somehow immune or mostly immune to the kind of stuff where I'm just yeah, just keep going. A lot of this movie was me sitting here being really, just easy logic defenses that just tear holes in this stuff. But the movie is made so well that I can sit there, just like when I watch things about cult groups and be I can see how people get pulled into this. Mm-hmm. Absolutely just get pulled into this and how all this came about. It is an interesting bit of history. I don't know exactly how much of this is realistic. Definitely, like, the case happened, the trial happened. There are some interesting things that were unraveled in the trial. The Zapruder film came about because of this trial. That's one of the most famous things, right, that people have around JFK assassination. And so all these theories, I also feel like this historically is like the start of conspiracy theories being a really bad thing. Like, there were theories beforehand, but with JFK, like, the hype and all of it just got worse and worse and worse. And something like this really opened up and unraveled in the, into the 90s and now, to where it's like conspiracy theory is life for some people versus like a side hobby, side hustle. Yeah. So it's that interesting, like, it's so well put together. It sells its point so well. It's interesting how it mixes actual historical footage, reenactments, where and how they reenacted it. Some of those reenactments are like at the place that it happened, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, they shot at Dealey Plaza from the 6th floor. Like, they did all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, really good, like, period piece stuff. But then I'm like, the content of it, I have to be like, okay, if you can look past the, like, bullshit that they're spewing, if you just try to be like, objectively, this is probably things that people said, then it's okay. But I'm like, I know too many people, like, are going to sit here and completely open up to it. And we can get into it. I'm just like, I'll put out there in Front Street, like, my belief is fucking Oswald shot him. He was a nut job.
Right. Are you a magic bullet theory defender?
Not, I mean, so, and then I'll say, there are things that are tough and there are things that are covered up. Like, it's not right, but I don't ever subscribe to this, like, grand conspiracy theories, because Michael Rooker fucking nails my theory right off the bat. Yeah. 12 people can't fucking keep a secret. 4 people can't fucking keep a secret. And if there's money involved, if there's any chance to make any money off of it, someone will give. And they're just the potential of so many hundreds of people to get to the potential theory that Garrison puts forward that would have to be part of it. Hundreds to 1,000 people in various countries. That is, like, not one person, like, leaked it, anonymously leaked it.
I think when you threaten people with death, you can keep things pretty secret for a long time.
I think we've seen other things unravel that are even, like, less, and people have been killed for those things too that are less crazy than this. I do think they covered their trail. Like, when the cops got their guy and they made mistakes, and there were mistakes in security, they covered their trail. Some of these people were involved in the CIA. I don't doubt that Oswald probably got help and money and maybe even a little bit more than that. I don't think that played into, like, what happened, but I don't doubt that America has helped pay for people that ended up later hurting us. Like, we put the guns right into their hands. That sounds very realistic.
That's FBI 101. Like,
exactly.
Let's find a kid online and radicalize him with a bunch of weird ideas and give him a bunch of weapons and then arrest him about to blow up the subway in New York, and say that we saved the world, right? It's like, we created the problem and then solved it.
Yes, right. Yeah, so I think that there's that aspect of, like, mistakes were made and mistakes were covered, but not to the point of, like, well, someone actually sat down and planned out JFK's got to go. Because honestly, like, how did you know the rest of it was going to fall in place? Like, that LBJ was going to do what you needed to do, that all these, right? Like, that's the part where I'm like, it's so much, like, luck for whatever your eventual plan was, if that's the motive. And then once you remove motive, you just don't really have anything to go on, right? That's one of the things you have to have. So anyway, we can get into particulars. Now I'm off on
you're already off the
train.
rails.
Yes.
We can talk more about theorizing what we happened, like, later down the line. But John, what did you think of the movie?
Well, getting back onto the parade route.
Don't do that.
I turned on Houston.
Well, the old route was shredded. I don't know what to do. I have to come back to it. I really liked, I've started to, like, the movie won me over after about the 20 to 30 minute mark, but I will say in my review of it, it was like, this is the best proto video essay I've ever seen in like a dramatization, because there's just so much exposition because of the historical complexity of like, so-and-so was here and they had to be here. And then that means that this happened. And like just watching people around dinner tables talking about it. And I'm like, there's no way you could make this more exciting. Like this is the most exciting it could possibly be. Combined with like Oliver Stone's dedication to really nailing the authenticity of how like the reproductions felt, like shooting an 8mm, 16mm, like, you know, doing like the different formats and having kind of these different flash forwards, alternative timelines, sort of here's what this might look like, conjecture. I think once you hit like the halfway mark and Donald Sutherland comes in, spoilers, everybody who hasn't seen JFK.
I didn't mention Donald Sutherland in the
cast. When he comes in, that's when it kind of goes a bit more off the rails into like, now we can do conjecture. Now we'll talk about, because I think Jim Garrison was approached by a military general who talked about that. Basically it was like a mix of those characters. At that point I was like, all right, it doesn't really matter beyond this point what they say. It can be convincing or it can kind of like lay these pieces in place. But what's like really clear and laid out really well by Oliver Stone is that some shit happened. The government, whether they intended to or not, like at different points, would just started fucking covering things up and being like, oh, but if we fucked that up, I guess we'll just not tell the American public, because either the pressures of either if they did want to invade Cuba or they didn't want to invade Cuba, they didn't want to start a nuclear war. Like there was somebody in a boardroom somewhere that was like, oh, fuck, this is bad. If the American public finds out, this is really bad. And we don't want that to happen. So just like try to tell them the right stuff that'll make them not be mad at us and we'll see what happens. But then they just proceeded to fuck up every time that they picked somebody to be on the fucking committee between Edgar Hoover and LBJ. Like at this point I've gone down the hole. I've listened to a lot of fucking recordings now and I'm just like on this historical trail.
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of the film. To Ryan's kind of point, it is a bit of a double-edged sword, because if you're sitting out there and you go to movies because, like my father, you'll watch a biographical pic and go, this really happened, then you're going to have a problem. Because when you meet this movie, you're going to be like, holy shit, everything has changed. And you're not going to go and do any more research. You're not even going to employ some kind of skepticism. You'll just be enamored with the filmmaking and how well put together it is. And like beyond that, that's where it's like cautionary. Like if you watch it, you got a grain of salt, a bit of it. And past that point, you can start looking at the evidence and the coincidence and the way that things are lined up and figured out from there. But I loved it. After like that 30-minute mark, I sent like 2 memes to Dixon and then I was all in. And the meme that I sent Ryan was the fucking Simpsons vegetarian PSA where it's like, Mr. McClure, I had a crazy friend who said that John F. Kennedy was shot from multiple directions. Is he crazy? And he's like, no, he's just never heard of the magic bullet theory. And then the food chain picture is all of the bullets and Lee Harvey Oswald. Anyways,
that's pretty brilliant, John.
Thank you. Oliver Stone inspired me. But yeah, I also got to call out like the score parts.
John Williams' score is incredible.
I loved some parts of the John Williams score, and then other parts where it got schmaltzy and
it
swelled. I was
schmaltzy,
like, oh, come on, like don't do that to me, John Williams. Don't you manipulate me.
It goes back and forth between schmaltzy and like driving drum beats that really pull you in and moves the movie along at a really nice pace.
Yeah, it was also just nice to see the grumpy old men back together again. I mean, not back together, but in the same movie.
Not on screen together.
Yeah,
but
I liked keeping that as my headcanon, that they had gone separate ways or that they would be united later. I had a great time with it. I am already asking a few friends that I know would be interested in it. I'm also giving them a preface, Ryan, so that I don't like wield this this power of Oliver Stone's for some kind of misinformation. But I thought it was a compelling and interesting movie, and it won me over to Kevin Costner. It is like one of the only movies I've watched with Kevin Costner that I was like, all right, you're all right, Kevin Costner. You're pretty okay at this point. I didn't like Field of Dreams. I didn't like Robin Hood. How could you? But, this one, good.
And when John told me that, I sent him a Simpsons meme of Ralph pointing up to Lisa at the roof of the school and saying, "Look, it's Kevin Costner, and he's winning us back."
It was a meme-filled evening.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think the movie is. I think it's fascinating in a couple ways. Like it's a really great mystery, right? And it drives along at this crazy pace. It's throwing information at you all the time. I've seen it twice now, and seeing it a second time definitely helps to kind of understand a little bit more who's who and all the names they're throwing around. Like I think the first time you watch it, it's a little bit of a whirlwind. Like, wait a minute, who's that? Wait, he's related to that guy? Like he knows what's going on? But you kind of don't care when you're watching it because it's just so compelling and it pulls you along. But a second watch definitely helps you kind of piece the mystery together a little bit better. But I also think it's a really interesting character piece on Jim Garrison as to like what happens to you when you realize that the world is not what you thought it was, right? Like, it reminded me of my experience with Christianity when I was like, oh shit, like all my beliefs are changing. The world is not what I thought it was. Everything's bullshit. What's going on? Like his kind of losing faith in the system and realizing that everything is corrupt around him and how it drives him almost to madness. Like he becomes so determined to solve this crime with very good intentions, right? He's like, we have to establish a good democratic society where like my son can grow up and actually like expect his government to tell him the truth and be able to live in a real democracy where we elect our leaders and they're not just murdered.
It goes for full Mr. Smith.
Yeah, like it's kind of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington to a degree. But like that drive like pulls him away from his family and destroys his marriage and makes him have terrible relationships with his kids and all these things. And I think it's interesting to see kind of him unraveling as a man as he's going through this. He's just so bound and determined to figure out what happened.
Yeah. I think that the thing that's hardest for me to pull apart from this movie is, the mystery being so overwhelmingly compelling that first time around when you're on that first watch. Like I was so engaged with that, but in retrospect, when I got out of it, I was like, man, that dude's life just like fell apart because of his obsessiveness. And like to what Ryan was saying earlier, when people get into cults, when people get into conspiracy theories, it like shreds your whole family because it changes your reality entirely, whether the conspiracy is leading to something true or not. You're going to get more and more involved. And I feel like the movie does such a great job of taking you in that rabbit hole and just being like, hey, here's like a little bit of information here and here and here. And you're not going to understand this now, but later you might. And why is John Candy here? Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it, Daddy-o.
This other police, yeah.
You got the right ho-ho, but the wrong ta-ta.
Oh my God. Just like those. And like, why does Joe Pesci's hair look so bad? Don't worry about it. That's going to play in later.
I love all the zany side characters in this. Joe Pesci and John Candy just make me smile when I see their characters on screen. They're great.
I was thinking about that too.
Tommy Lee Jones too is fucking awesome.
Oh my God. Like all of this, they're like the out of makeup Batman villains from the 90s.
Yeah.
Like that kind of shit.
Clay Bertrand and Clay Shaw, that's Two-Face.
Oh my God. Oh, it's right there. He was trying to tell us all along. If only they had Jim Carrey in this movie, he couldn't have stood his buffoonery or whatever the fuck he says.
Oh my God.
The one thing that I thought about too, just while we're on the topic of those zany side characters, is how this movie made me realize whenever somebody talks about a conspiracy or there's like a historical document of like groundbreaking, the scandal, it exploded here or whatever. I feel like there's always one character in any one of those historical stories that everybody has to shit talk, in the sense of like they'll interview, like this is the librarian who worked in like the fucking Library of Congress and they saw this one politician, and they'll cut to her and she'll just be like, well, he had this terrible toupee and he had these fucking horrible eyebrows and he was just like always in a size coat too small or some shit. And I just, this Joe Pesci made me realize that. I was like, this is probably written word for word in the book. He had this fucking wretched rag that was on his head and his fucking eyebrows that were caterpillars. Like, oh my God.
He has a collection of mice because he thinks he's going to cure cancer. He is a goon for the CIA and he's trying to cure cancer on the side. Yeah. Just incredible. Like you can't make that shit up. Like, that's fucking wild. This is a real guy.
That's my point. It's just like, holy shit, there's no way this person exists, but they absolutely do. And they are on Bourbon Street. Oh man. Well, let's talk, I want to talk about the beginning of the movie because I feel like my question to y'all is, do you feel like this, one, did y'all know about everything about like this JFK scandal before you watched this movie? Two, do you feel like this gave you enough of a historical context at the beginning to really get going? Or do you feel like it was sound and fury of like history and then Oliver Stone was like, and start the movie, here we go?
I knew a decent amount about the JFK assassination before seeing the movie, but not as much as is conveyed in the film. And since then, I've done more research before watching it again for this. And Oliver Stone actually made a documentary in 2022 called JFK Revisited. That was a 2-hour documentary, like re-examining new evidence that's come up and documents that have been declassified and things like that. And then there was a 4-hour version of it called JFK: Destiny Betrayed. It was like the version that he wanted to put out, and the studio made him cut it down to 2 hours, but then he released his 4-hour version. And I watched the 4-hour cut, and it's fucking wild. Like, they get into all like really specific details in a lot of the stuff that they talk about in the movie, like the doctoring of the Oswald photo, the other Oswalds that were popping up in different parts of the world, and like details about his brain, like, you know, being like weighing too much, and like doctoring the autopsy photos, and a lot of really interesting information that like basically leads you to, you know, there's some weird fucking shit going on here, and it's probably a government, military, CIA conspiracy here that's going on, but it's just hard to, like, you can't pin it down because they won't release all the documents. They've probably destroyed most of anything that would be relevant in the first place in order to figure things out. But it's definitely like, I learned some stuff the first time I watched it and then did some more research, but I had a base knowledge to go into it that I knew a lot of the things they were talking about. But like, I didn't know who David Ferry was the first time that I watched it. I didn't know who Clay Shaw was. So like, there were pieces that I was having to put together.
Yep, Ryan.
Yeah, I don't think I knew as much about the trial or how they got to the trial, which I think is that for me was the interesting part of it. And some of these side players, right, that you know, I didn't know about. I think the like general theories and, you know, and what happened, and that I've heard kind of over and over, and I'm actually pretty bad about like arguing with conspiracy people about various things. Or, you know,
them and telemarketers, you just can't stay away, can you?
Telemarketers. And so, yeah, I've kind of come up against it. It's frustrating to argue, though, like that. I think I come and go out of it because I do think that a lot of this, the movie does a good job of presenting what I think a district attorney generally does, which is just try to find the littlest things to nitpick, to throw, right, to add to that doubt, not necessarily proving anything, just throwing enough things out to confuse the jury, confuse your audience. And Stone is using it as well. Whether you believe it or not, you just throw things out there. You just poke a hole here. And there's tons of fucking holes in it. And this is just like one of the most under the microscope things I think there is. And it's, just like a clusterfuck of stuff that got left on the floor. And yeah, by now, anything that would be relevant's been burned. Like, there's stuff that's still like closed off because obviously stuff got released in 92, stuff got released in 2017. There's been little trickles of it, and some of that stuff, you know, including Shaw actually being part of the CIA, right? Like that was something, right? So things were uncovered, but none of them have really brought anything like big to the picture. I do think it was interesting watching this and hearing a lot of these theories and then thinking about more recent events or things that we know since then that were government cover-ups, like even since the 90s, that I'm like, the more you piece them together, the more you're like, this kind of falls apart. Some of these arguments kind of fall apart because you realize how stupid humans are.
You realize that certain humans will release government documents and secrets on a Minecraft server in Discord.
Right,
just
exactly.
Fucking goaded into it.
Fucking love that guy. That guy is a national hero. Anybody who releases military secrets to the public is a national hero.
He's a true patriot.
Yeah.
That's one of those like he's so American he's stupid kind of things for me, where it made sense, like how Dixon was dogging on Pez the other day. Sorry, we're off the rails.
Oh,
yeah.
But Pez is
I
the
was
most
at least
American
talking about
candy.
Kennedy.
Yeah. Pez is there's a Robert Kennedy
sure there's a
Pez dispenser.
JFK.
I bet there is.
Yeah.
But Pez is, come on, it's the most American made, cheaply manufactured
Pez is the worst candy. It doesn't even taste like anything.
It's made from the essence of bones of animals.
Yeah.
What's more American than that?
Literally just chalk pills. Like, that's all it is.
Anyways, Ryan, to what you were saying. I don't even remember. It was you were talking about give me a second. I can do it. I can't do it.
No, you can't.
Yeah, I was just saying the more like modern things that even against this movie, you can kind of go back and be like, even since 91, is this one 91?
91.
Yeah, that you can kind of be like, well, all right, this sort of falls apart argument wise. Like, a good example here, Donald Sutherland's ex that we mentioned.
Yep.
Yeah, my understanding is that was actually somebody that Stone had brought on when he was making the movie that kind of told him most of that stuff. So this wasn't a conversation that Garrison had. It was a conversation that Stone had decades after the assassination. Yeah. And he goes into this great detail about how the Secret Service would never let this kind of thing happen and how they would have gone. And now I'm like, we know, speaking of recent events, like you said, Dixon, like Secret Service fucking sucks at their job. Yeah. Like in an even clearer what you were supposed to do situation, where there's one fucking building, right? That is like, they didn't even check that. And they were told like multiple times that it's like this much more complicated multi-story buildings all the way around. And all of these people to think that they would have had that under control.
Wasn't there some shit about how like they were following Oswald up until that point, and like a week before he was taken off of like some kind of exceptions list? It was basically like the taxi driver list. Like if you see anybody who looks like Travis Bickle, like fucking gauge him. Oswald's one of those. And then like the week before, they were like, take Oswald off of it. I think that like leans into the conspiracy, the coincidence.
But like, how many times?
It's one of those things where it's like,
how many times in the last decade have we heard about what ends up being a shooter or a terrorist? That it's like, oh, well, they had pegged him and they had all these calls, and someone called in 5 times and told them there was going to be a bomb, and then there was a bomb, right? And they just didn't follow up on it, whether it's a sheriff or the FBI. Like,
we're just going to end up arguing about this and not talking about the movie.
No, we're not.
We're going to talk about it.
The thing to me that is like the most telling is like, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but like, that Oswald shot 3 times in 5.6 seconds with a shitty old rifle that he ordered online to an address that was tied to his name, despite being in Dallas, Texas, where he could have just gone anywhere to buy a gun that was better. And then like one of the bullets had to hit that dude that wasn't, was just standing on the side, and like the other 2 bullets actually hit him and did all that damage. And then this Zapruder film, you see that he was shot from the front, right? Like, it's very obvious that Kennedy was shot in the head from the front. And so it's like, there's clearly another person involved, right? Maybe Oswald was shooting from the window. I think he probably wasn't, but maybe he was. Yeah. But there was somebody else there that was contributing to what was going on.
What my opening statements, counselor, were
Your Honor.
Your Honor, I'm just a simple podcast co-host, but if you ask me, I reckon 12 chickens doesn't make a duck. I think it's one of those things where the evidence, it's wild to me because I was watching, a number of videos now that are all trying to dissect the same amount of information, new information that's been released after that committee in the 90s. And they talk about all the stuff that like this movie generated. And it kind of comes down to this point of that's a point where the government was so incompetent in how they handled disclosing information that it no longer matters what really happened. People who are obsessed with what happens will find their truths where they need it. But it is like the case that if there was a second shooter, Edgar Hoover committed to, it's 3 bullets. That's what we found in that library. And it's this gun, and Oswald did or didn't do it. We found his prints, whatever. There's a lone gunman. There's a single shooter.
And Alan fucking Dulles ran the committee who used to run the CIA and JFK fired him.
Yeah. And so like there's all these bits and pieces that point to, okay, even if there was this other thing, the government still has to save face. It's kind of amazing that like people underestimate the amount of saving face and politics the government has to do to continue to maintain some semblance of a trust. They have to inspire like fear at different points in time through not necessarily their conspiracy, but like you see it in political campaigns. That's the whole like Republican Party's platform. And also the Democratic Party's platform is just generating fear in different directions. I wouldn't say that the same kinds of fear or the same gravitas between the two. You know, you have fucking Project 2025 on the conservative side, which is terrifying. And on the Democrat side, it's an us or them sort of like, what do you want, this hellscape or not? But like that is a sample of what is required to get somebody else to be driven into action, to get the American people to actually join in action. And now we're running a political podcast. I'd like to rebrand this.
Yeah. Well, there is a certain amount of like the government decided to move on. Like, no doubt. The government was like this. Does. Yeah. No, it's like, we need to move on. We made a decision. We need to move on. We need to move on to the next thing. If people keep sticking on this point as a country, we can't move forward. And so, once they had that, they didn't want to, anything that caused that to change, they needed to keep quiet or get rid of. And and so there was definitely that continued effort to just be like, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to release anything. Right. And that's a very government stance too, of like, there is nothing. Yes. Okay, you found something. We can't give it to you. Okay, well, it turns out we can give it to you because there's nothing in it, but we don't want to. Right. And like, just to constantly try that.
Or we'll give you like literally like 500,000 pages of documents to just drown you in information so you can't find what you actually want to know.
That's where ChatGPT comes in now. It'll tell us the conspiracies and what's true. I mean, that's where I feel like that's where X enters into the film. And Ryan, I think to your point, very valid point, I feel like I misrepresented the character of X by saying it was somebody that Jim Garrison had conversations with. It was
there were
based
like
on
two
a general
things that got smashed together. One of them was a Garrison thing, and then one of them was this other.
Yeah, and that's where like the filmmaking kind of it is the danger of filmmaking. Of you have to make these cuts, these adaptations. Oliver Stone is on record saying, "I watched the director's cut." By the way, I have no idea how to watch the theatrical cut. Do they even have a theatrical cut anymore?
They do. I haven't seen it. I've only seen the director's cut, which is like 17 minutes longer or something like that.
Yeah, and Oliver Stone said there was 4 hours before that they were like, oh, we had 4 hours and we had to cut it down to 3. And I was like, what is the rest of this movie? Like, what could it
Marilyn Monroe connection?
Is that what comes into play?
I saw like extended scenes on the Blu-ray, and it was just, I think they just kind of trimmed some scenes up and removed. There was some stuff in there that was like, oh, that's kind of funny, but like it wasn't essential to the story.
You know, while I was watching this too, I had the thought that not to question or denigrate Oliver Stone's filmmaking. I think that this film was really well done, but what if Quentin Tarantino had handled the dialogue scenes? Because
interesting.
I'm very gripped by anything that Tarantino can do. And I know that he likes to write his own shit, but I feel like it'd be a fun exercise to take Oliver Stone's exposition heavy, these are historical facts, and this is that. Tarantino infuses a lot of pop culture and all this shit into his scripts and stuff, and he pulls that shit off really well. I feel like that could be some kind of dream team shit we've never seen before. Until, of course, Kennedy's head explodes. Like, I'm not talking whatever else, but just like it's part of his revisionist timeline. Why not? Rick Dalton was there.
He would not be capable of making this movie. He would have someone come save the day, and Kennedy would survive. The movie would be over in the first scene.
They stop every conspirator, shoot them up, and burn them in film. But yeah, like it was one of those things where I don't know that I've watched. Okay, I don't know if I've watched an Oliver Stone film before this.
Oh yeah,
I really don't know. I can't remember if I've watched something like it because I don't remember this style when I've seen a movie like any time recent. The way the exposition's handled, the way that the pacing is, the kind of dedication to splicing in these historical elements. Like the only other time that I've seen something equivalent to this and at a much lower quality level is watching the History Channel. And so it's just one of those things where I was like, what else has Oliver Stone done? How has he done it? I've never seen Platoon. I don't think that he does this in Platoon, if I'm mistaken.
It's a very different.
It's a lot more dramatic, right? So like, what are the facets? Like, what are things? What do you all know of Stone's style? Like, what is it in here that kind of is the through line, or is there a through line? Is this unique because it's?
I think he tends to kind of craft his movie around what works best for the story. Like, I haven't seen all of his movies, but I think the style for JFK is very unique to this film and the films of his that I have seen. Like his, like Platoon, I think it's just a fictional story, but set in a real setting, right? And like a lot of his other movies are more, dramatic driven rather than like really trying to get information to the viewer, right?
Yeah. I've seen Platoon, I've seen Wall Street, I've seen Any Given Sunday, and those are all.
Oh, I forgot that he did that movie. Oh,
yeah,
that movie sucks.
They're all very different from each other.
Yeah,
right. They're all very different from each other, and they're all very different from JFK. In my headcanon, Oliver Stone has moved much more down the JFK trail. Because he has more and more movies.
He did Natural Born Killers.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
That's written by Tarantino, isn't it?
Maybe.
Is it? I don't know.
I think
it has a Tarantino vibe to it for sure, but it's an Oliver Stone.
Oh yeah, no, it was written. Tarantino was writer on it.
Pretty sure Tarantino hates that movie.
Probably.
Oh, interesting.
And so I guess I'm never going to get my dream collaboration between Oliver Stone and Tarantino.
Yeah.
It's too late for me now.
He did Savages in 2012, which was a three-way relationship with Taylor Kitsch, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Blake Lively. Did you see that?
Nope, I didn't see that one.
Yeah, but he's definitely gotten this like W and Snowden and right, like he's going down more and more of this angle. It feels like.
He did that really shitty Alexander the Great movie with Colin Farrell.
Yeah, he is like. It is interesting how different some of these things are. They all do have a certain intensity to them, if that makes sense, right?
It's weird to me because what y'all just listed is like a list of shitty films that have kind of come out from Oliver Stone, who in interviews that I've watched always, even in like the 90s, I watched a bunch of interviews about JFK because people were like, you made this controversial film, like let's talk about it real quick. And he was like always adamant that the story was second, like most important thing for him as a filmmaker, that it was that he could continue to work on his craft and like really develop who he is as a filmmaker and use JFK and other stories to like, he's like, yeah, I want to tell a story that I'm interested in. I want to tell this, but I want to do it in a way that challenges me. And I feel like JFK is the challenge of how do you do something that feels authentic? How do you make this film resonate and feel persuasive in what it's trying to argue? Because he took what were known as like more fringe books based on the JFK conspiracy at the time and adapted them. And then it just sounds like after that, he was like really convinced to just start doing the things that he thought were the most interesting stories to tell in the same vein that started to align with his like reality. I don't know that he told more interesting fantasy or fiction or any of that stuff after is what it sounds like, but just observation.
I mean, I think the through line for me in his movies is his political views. He's a very political filmmaker. Not all of his movies are political. Like he made a fucking Alexander the Great movie, right?
That's
like,
technically political.
I guess. Political. He made a movie about a threesome. Like but like, like Snowden, W, Born on the 4th of July, Platoon, JFK, Nixon. Like he's very anti-establishment, anti-government blob, military-industrial complex, and he's like trying to convey that message to the people and showing like how many flaws there are in our current system, and that like we need to be paying more attention to these types of things, like our government's penchant for war, is something that we need to be paying closer attention to and that we need to be concerned about.
But Dixon, we must preserve our precious bodily fluids. Okay, there's no other way to say it.
I would imagine that Oliver Stone loves Doctor Strangelove, but I have not heard him comment on it.
I would imagine as well. Which that was like one thing that I found out because of this movie was, and I didn't realize the historical context. I just thought Doctor Strangelove is a great satire of the time in the Cold War, but that general and Buck Turgidson are based on an actual military general, which was fascinating. And apparently that general was in the operating room or the fucking whenever they were doing the actual
the autopsy.
The autopsy, yeah, he was there. He was the one blowing cigar smoke to obscure a lot of shit.
Yes.
They asked him to not do it, and he kept doing it.
As it like smoking a victory cigar while the autopsy was going on.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Another really interesting historical point to me about like the timeline of the JFK assassination is that there's a book that came out in the early 60s called 7 Days in May. There's a political thriller about a military coup on the American government. JFK had read that book, really liked it, and had talked to Kirk Douglas, who was producing the movie, and it had said, hey, I'm really excited about you guys making this into a movie. You can shoot some scenes in front of the White House. They made that movie and were about to release it when JFK got shot. And then they delayed the release a few months, just like the Doctor Strangelove release got delayed. They actually came out a couple weeks apart from each other in early 2024.
What?
And I watched 7 Days in May earlier this week because this would be interesting to watch.
Wait, they came out in 2024?
I'm sorry, 1964.
It's like, damn, they took forever to come out with
Doctor Strangelove and 7 Days in May came out in early 1964.
Okay.
After the president had been killed, because they didn't want to release it in like late 2023 when this was all going on. But it's a really great movie. It's a John Frankenheimer film starring Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster about a crazy military general who goes out and does big public speeches and has a bunch of public support. The president, played by Frederick March, is trying to negotiate a peace deal and a nuclear dearmatization, is that what you said? With a treaty with Russia to both get rid of our nukes. The general is trying to force a coup because he thinks that he doesn't like the peace snake president. He thinks we're all going to get killed because he's going to give up our nukes. Like this was a fictional story that was written right like a year or two before JFK was killed. They made the movie about to release it and then had to delay it a few months. Fucking wild.
Pretty fucking wild.
Yeah.
Damn.
It's a really good movie. I highly recommend it. 7 Days in May.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Damn. Well, this is just an episode we're going to be off the rails. Okay? I've just accepted it. At this point, where you introduce conspiracy theories, it's fucking wild. But Ryan, I'm going to bring up Metal Gear Solid for Dixon because I feel like you find this fascinating. There was one of the games, Metal Gear Solid is a franchise in video games. They had the fourth one came out and it had multiplayer where you could build your own base. It's the fourth one, right? I think.
No, that was fifth one.
The fifth one. The fifth one. You could build your own base. And it was in like the 60s or the 70s or some shit. And or the 80s. I don't fucking know. Cold War era. It doesn't matter. Cold War era.
Anyway.
And you could have nukes, like tactical nukes. But there was an end state of the multiplayer game where everybody who had the game, if they promised to demilitarize or like denuclearize, whatever the fuck it is, disarm that, then you could reach peace and it would give you a cutscene that everybody saw at the same time because you all achieved peace and nobody was able to achieve it. Because they did it by like a glitch or some shit.
Yeah.
But then like it took like years, and once the player base dwindled, the remaining players were able to negotiate peace. But until then, nobody could, which is fucking a great political statement from video games.
Yeah. You can like break onto you get onto other people's bases and you can like dearm and take their nukes or steal them or whatever. But there were people who were just constantly people who just constantly made more nukes just to make them, just to keep
the shit going. The fucking arms race. But I was like, man, that's some wild shit.
But like Kennedy was in peace talks with Khrushchev and like the military hated him for it and all this, obviously there's all the Cuba stuff and all that.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty crazy to me how like that fictional story was written while all this real stuff is happening. And then he actually you could argue that a coup actually does happen. We'll say that it's possible that a coup occurred. But yeah.
And we know fully that we've done it. We've helped other countries do exactly that.
Yes. Dude, we can make coups for breakfast every fucking morning.
How do you think Castro got
some
there?
Some people make couscous, so who fucking knows? The coup so nice they named it twice.
Yeah, and it definitely adds to that. And I think Garrison has that quote in here where he says, like, if this had happened in Russia, like he describes it out as if it would, he was like, this happened to Khrushchev.
Nobody would buy this shit.
They wouldn't buy it for a second. And it's like, yeah, you do take a step back, and there's a certain amount of like, yeah, I think if we heard this story somewhere else, we'd be like, oh yeah, CIA again, there, fuck that shit up, right?
Yeah. Also, I love that scene where he's on the late night talk show trying to describe the case that he's taking against Clay Shaw, and the fucking interviewer will not let him talk and actually give his piece. And it reminds me of our modern media and like what's okay to talk about and what's not okay to talk about. Yeah. It's like, if you say Joe Biden is old and can't do his job, then you get ushered off they go to commercial, right? They don't let you talk about it. Now it's okay to talk about because he has admitted that he's
now
too
we agree that
old.
That's
and now
the case.
We have a new set of truths that we all have to agree on. Very 1984-ish. Yeah. But like, he's there just trying to show his case, and the guy's like, we can't show that we have libel laws here. We got to cut to commercial. We can't do this crazy shit. It's like if you are trying to push a narrative that is against whatever the main push of the uniparty and the media is, then like you're not allowed to say it in a large setting. And it's just very like that scene. I was like, oh man, that feels like every day on the news right now.
Well,
like, it's just...
those fucking politics don't even just extend to the government. That is social. We talked about that recently. Which fucking episode would I brought up Family Guy randomly and talked about how they didn't joke, like they wouldn't joke about certain celebrities because I know that guy, like, whatever. Yeah. But like, you get somebody like Norm Macdonald fired from Saturday Night Live for making OJ, that's my lucky stabbing cap jokes. Yeah. And like this kind of shit where people are just, they're friends, they're tied in a social network, and they refuse to let other people speak ill of who they favor. And it extends beyond politics. And so it's one of those things where I feel like this film and Oliver Stone's message with it is, at least I'm not going to speak and put words in Stone's mouth, but my interpretation of his message is much more, you shouldn't just accept everything at face value. You also shouldn't go off the fucking deep end to an extent and start making conjecture, even though that's the entire last stand of this movie is, I'm going to make conjecture for this. I feel like,
it doesn't go well for Jim Garrison.
It does not go well for Jim Garrison.
Yeah.
When you look in the respective, but John Williams' score says otherwise. But like there's just this kind of overwhelming, hey, just be more mindful of what you're talking about. Be more mindful of how you're accepting these facts. And it is okay to doubt. It should be okay to doubt. It should be okay to voice doubt. And that's, I think, a through line we've talked about numerous times on different episodes, from talking about silence and what it is to doubt your religion, to politics and JFK and what it is to doubt the facts that are given by a committee, by like a law. I remember I talked to a relative recently, had a late night discussion over whiskey, and it turned to politics, and they were like, who are you voting for? And it got I wouldn't say ugly, but it just got into this like, okay, well, like, who do I really have to choose from? Because RFK Jr. has a worm in his brain. And
he doesn't have a brain.
He leaves dead bears in Central Park.
It's a mystery.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that bear story.
Yeah, it's just great. And fucking Donald Trump has his alleged couch fucker, which has been disproven, sure, but it's just fun to say. And
the fact that it sticks around
that he hasn't.
You can't prove he hasn't. Your Honor.
The fact that it sticks around just shows that people would believe it, which is
yes, exactly.
Something.
They would believe it, and so there's like that whole aspect of that.
And then you have Kamala Harris, who, whenever she's asked a question, she just melts into a puddle.
She's a character from Veep.
Yeah,
and
she
you're
is
just like, okay,
Selena Meyer,
like yeah. So there you go. But we had this whole conversation where he just couldn't believe. I was telling him about how there was an article a long time ago, it was misconstrued, that said that middle class Black Americans commit more crimes than lower class white Americans do. Typical fucking race baiting bullshit article. And really what it was the article never disclosed in full context what the law being broken was, but it was related to like speeding
Loitering?
violations and like, yeah, it was speeding violations, like cars being pulled over. And it was taken by a conservative wing of like a action, sort of like a bunch of Twitter followers and shit started spewing it as being, oh, well, black people commit more crimes than white people do. It's proven statistically that like middle class do this. It's like, what is the fucking crime exactly? Why don't you look at what the laws are defined? Yeah, they got stopped and frisked, and like it dates back to like Jim Crow and that kind of shit where it's like these loiterers. I mean, well, I'm just speaking in general of like, you had loitering laws because they were Jim Crow. Because if you could prove that somebody had broken the law, then they didn't get to vote. And it just so happened that when black people were standing in line in like the 1800s, hey, you're loitering and I'm going to arrest you. And now you're a felon and you cannot vote. I've taken your voting right away. There you go. And so like, there's just kind of that like, hey, maybe fucking scrutinize what you're looking at. Maybe scrutinize the facts that you're given. The law of the land, the rule of the government. It's not necessarily something that you're supposed to just accept at face value and say, I trust my government. Big Papa government, Uncle Sam tells me the truth all the time. Not always the case. But
yeah.
Rarely the case.
Yeah.
Rarely the case.
I think if the movie had given that, right? Garrison's last, his closing arguments, which were not his real closing arguments, are really like a full crock of shit. Now, there is a certain amount of like, you can say whatever you want in closing arguments. So he could have said that and it would have been fine. But it is literally like all insane conjecture. But it is in closing arguments that he made. The movie chooses to use that as its close. And then, it doesn't really bring up the fact that he did uncover some things, right? Like I mentioned, the Zapruder film wouldn't have come out. And the movie does get that, but that's just sort of like in the sea of shit that's going on.
Else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If at the end of the movie, you know, his little kid comes up to him and is like, "Is it worth it, Daddy?" You know, or some bullshit.
Like, no.
Well, and he's like, "No," you're like, "I did uncover some things, right? Like that I did show the government isn't doing things for our best interest. I did poke some holes in this, right? And like maybe I didn't uncover absolutely everything, and maybe I didn't put Shaw in his place or whatever, but I stood up for it and I tried and I did, you know, hit the government a bit, right? And then the next person will help maybe improve a little bit more, right? And this is and dig into like the fact that this was a time of political violence and turmoil in the country. It was a real awakening. You know, Oliver Stone is a baby boomer who was a teen when Kennedy was assassinated. Like he saw it and he remembered it. Like, right. He's very much not unlike us, very much grew up with this. And it was a time, like, and you hear people talk about it, that it was like an awakening. The end of Animal Farm, Animal House, the end of Animal House.
Totally different.
Completely different movies. At the end of the Animal House, they have their little like send off with everybody. And it's the date of their graduation, it shows is November 21st, 1964. With the 22nd being the assassination of JFK.
63,
sort of,
63,
or 63. The idea being that like, that was the last day of...
These were simpler times.
Right, of these just being kids and doing what they, you know, fucking around. And then the world kind of woke up. So I, like, also Donald Sutherland.
Holy shit, he is there.
Fuck, it's all coming together.
A lot of movies.
I fucking love it. Oh my God. Coincidence?
But yeah, that is a very interesting point, right, of this waking up. And then we have, you know, fucking that's before Nixon, right? Like things unravel more and more, and our faith in the government has been shook more and more as the years go on. And this is part of it. Like the JFK assassination is definitely a start of us really not getting along with our government well.
Yeah.
And a major decrease in people going out to vote, people being engaged with politics, right? Like drops more and more and more. And so, yeah, it's like there's something interesting there if you can focus on that story and less of the like specifically overturning the JFK thing. And I feel like the movie does really just too much hammer home the like specifically the JFK like
it sounds like you
overall
have the
conspiracy.
Saving Private Ryan problem.
Yes,
Saving Ryan's privates.
Saving Ryan's privates. Yeah, Saving Private Ryan's problem that I had.
That's the porn version.
Yes, Shaving Privates Ryan. Shaving Ryan's privates is it. But yeah, like you have the Saving Private Ryan problem that I had, where it's like you successfully gripped me with the content of your movie and the way that your movie was made, or I should say the way that your movie was made was the most gripping thing. And that at the end, I wish you had at least kind of put a moral cherry on top of what was this all for, other than there is a conspiracy out there.
Oh, interesting.
These other kind of things.
I think that would make it like kind of shitty if you had like a moral bow on the end of it. Like I think the fact that it's open-ended and it's like it's not resolved is the point, right?
Well,
because we haven't resolved it, right? It's this open wound in American history that is just festering, that has caused so many other problems in society that have kind of built out of that.
Let me put it in terms of another movie that we all can agree on. Zack Snyder's 300. Okay, it's the end of Zack Snyder's 300 is what Ryan wants.
I don't remember the end of 300. I blocked that movie out of my mind like so many arrows in the sky.
Yes. Leonidas, the leader of a fascist government, has successfully drawn blood from a god king. Has proven that somebody who is up until that point been infallible is in fact fallible, is what Ryan is arguing. Correct, Ryan?
Yeah, I think you could even go as far to say, Garrison, do you really believe all of it? And he'd be like, no, but I don't believe what they gave us either, right?
Yeah.
And I've kept an open mind, and I've dug, and I have found things, right? I've found things, and if people keep digging and thinking they'll find things, is the theory that I laid out literally what happened? I don't know, right? But that was something I could do to help bring it down. Right? Which is true and right. Like, I'm like, that's fine. But they kind of walk away where it's like, that's exactly what happened to the CIA. They did exactly
the
all
judge
of these
stops
things.
banging his gavel, and they slowly, he's like, you know what? I'm not going to object or sustain anything anymore.
Yeah, fuck it all. Who's listening to me anyway?
Yeah.
I think the point of it, though, is like, I see what you're saying. It's like the closing arguments wrapped up in a nice, neat bow, and it makes it feel like the movie is like, this is exactly what happens, definitely. But like, I think the point of the film and of like trying to figure out what happened with JFK is not like really to figure out exactly what happened. It's to show that the narrative that the government is telling us is clearly wrong, right? We don't know what the right answer is, but we know what the wrong answer is, right? And like, there's so much evidence saying that like Oswald as a lone shooter is clearly not what happened that day. There's other things going on that the government knows and won't tell us, right? And like, that's the important takeaway, I think, right? Like John, you're saying, like the point is to not trust your government, to not trust your leaders, and to figure things out for yourself. And I think the movie does a really good job of kind of getting that message across.
Sure.
Like, sure, you might have somebody watch the movie and be like, "Oh my God, that's exactly what happened," and it's like, it's a prosecutor presenting a case against the defendant, right? He's pulling in as many things as he can. There are a lot of great questions that are asked in the course of that prosecution of like, "Hey, this guy over here is involved with these 4 people, and why? How is he connected with all them? Why does that make sense?" That doesn't mean that person was a central figure. Like, they definitely did not prove that Clay Shaw like ordered the killing of JFK, right?
Absolutely.
Or that he was like part of the chain that was dictating the death of JFK. He was definitely involved in efforts to overthrow the Cuban government and to like fund weapons to all these people, and connected to Oswald intimately in a way that is like, he was around. Whether or not he is guilty, I think, is kind of beside the point. And the point is the theory that we've all been told that has to be true actually has to be false. There's no way to defend Oswald as the lone gunman. It's just not a legitimate.
Can
I think it's
just
valley.
Interject real quick? Just say that I think that from Ryan's perspective, and it's also my interpretation of kind of the way that the film plays out, we're now in a culture and an understanding of debates must be won. Debates have a 1 and 0 binary factor of false and true. And that now, if somebody was to watch JFK, and maybe in the 90s as well, if somebody was to watch it, but I feel like film crowds back then were a little more literate before Rob Schneider and Adam Sandler hit the scene, that there is very much like a tendency now to see this and take it as gospel, to completely miss those pieces. Like when you introduce doubt into something, to miss the fact that the doubt is supposed to cloud your judgment to a preserved narrative instead of opening you up to accepting a new holistic narrative. Like it shouldn't just be the case that I walk out of this movie and go, oh my God, JFK was killed by the CIA. I may make memes about it, but like it's not the case that I for sure believe everybody involved was part of this grand scheme to do all of these things. Like that shouldn't be the case. It should be much more, okay, they withheld information for this long. They did these things. What really is going on? I want to know, and to demand that. And I know Oliver Stone's on record as saying that like he wants the American people to demand the information that they are rightfully owed, to know what happened to JFK through these committees and these things. But it continues to be the case that like, even when the government digs into it, it's too late now. Like the government fucked up for so many years trying to deliver that information that transparency is lost. Documents shredded, documents lost, documents whatever, doctored and other things. And now there is no way that the trust could be established unless, to my understanding, if the government started propagating like information about how that fucked up. To me, I feel like that would be the truth, is if, you know, you went to, and I've never been to the museum in Dallas for that 6th floor. But
it's a bunch of propaganda about how
exactly
Oswald was the killer.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like if there was like pieces there where it's like, and these are the bullets that they said that were found, and here is why there's conjecture, and the government actually withheld this information for so long, and like just owning up to how long it was delayed by this committee, the people and the ties that they had to it, like, oh, this was a CIA member who was fired by Kennedy, like just fully expose all of that and talk about it in a historical context and leave it to the American people to make decisions of like, okay, the government you have now doesn't have the same context, doesn't have the same knowledge, can't provide you the same answers. It is not the same beast that it was then.
As a sign of good faith in an effort to be transparent to the public. If the government wanted to be like, hey, we're turning over a new leaf, trust us, here's all the JFK documents. That would be an interesting step in the right direction.
There's those bits, but like it can't. I feel like there are too many people now that have conjecture as well of like, well, that could impact the way that people see these things, and they would propagate it now into this point, and that's why we have to wait until decades later to release any documents, because by then everybody who would have cared is dead, and all of the new generation is going to be like, yeah, fuck it, sure. Like that's
and even then it's like half blacked out.
Yeah, and you can still say to that generation, like, I'm not whoever was fucking blacking these things out. I'm this person now. Like, hey, I'm your cool dad. Like, let me turn my cap backwards.
We have some new cool wars for you.
Well, I think, John, you probably heard me say this before, but like transparency is information. Transparency is not explanation, right?
That's
and
exactly
and the government can give you all of the information and then be like, here's what we get out of it, but then you can get the option. And that's how court works, right? You provide all the evidence and you can make all the arguments, but the jury sits there and says, okay, well, based on the evidence, do these arguments align? And the government has not given us evidence, right, that matches up. And I think that there's that valley from here's what the story is to the CIA did all these crazy things, and neither one is really that we have evidence for, right? It's something else.
It's very circumstantial.
Yeah, it's very, man. And this all of Shaw's stuff is fucking circumstantial hearsay, conjecture. Like all of his stuff is logically unsound, but he definitely points at things where it's like, also, here's some things that are logically unsound. And then he jumps to a conclusion, but he at least like shows you, hey, this doesn't make sense. And to some extent, I can be like, and OJ, right? The fucking travesty of how the police handled that situation opened up holes right? Opened up those holes that then the defense can go in and be like, look, what's the chain of evidence on this? Right? Which is another thing. We can look at the Kennedy thing and there's fucking chain of evidence, sloppiness all over it. And that's enough to be like, okay, well, now I have to question it. I think everyone pretty much now is like, OJ did it. Like that definitely seems to be the consensus. And OJ did it, and he probably was right to get off because the evidence didn't end up being there because of all of the way that the police wanted to make it happen and make the story happen, right? And they did it too far to fuck it up. And I think
brother-in-law bought a white Bronco recently, and I forget what I made an OJ joke.
I can't believe they're back.
He didn't know what I was talking about.
What?
Oh my
what
gosh.
the fuck is wrong? He's like a year younger than me. I was like, how do you not know about OJ? And like since then, he has like learned about it. But I'm like, oh my God, you can't buy a fucking white Bronco and not know who OJ Simpson is.
Don't they have to?
You can't buy a white Bronco and not murder your wife. Hey, wait a minute.
Don't they have to disclose that to you, like a dead person in the house or whatever? Like you go to buy.
There's a 3-day waiting period for you to get your white Bronco.
I think I was like, have you been any slow speed car chases lately or something? And he was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, what? Like, okay.
But
I actually I believe like that the military and the CIA conspired to kill JFK. I believe that personally. I also agree with the jury's decision as it was laid out here to acquit Clay Shaw.
Yeah.
Right. Because like it was circumstantial. There wasn't enough evidence to put him in jail for that. And I don't know if Garrison knew that, but the movie seems to kind of know that, where it's like, they're like, fuck, we don't really have the case that we want, but we just kind of have to go at this point because everybody's dying and we just need to get him in custody and we need to go and present the case to the public. And Garrison in the film seems more concerned about like the public, like winning in the court of public opinion and getting people to understand that there's a problem here and we need to do more research and figure out what happened. Right. And like he loses the case. And I think that's the right decision that like the jury, and there's that juror who's interviewed at the end of the movie outside the courthouse. And he's like, we couldn't find enough evidence. We didn't think it was beyond a reasonable doubt that Clay Shaw was involved, but we definitely believe there was a conspiracy. And, I think he presented an argument in court that is very convincing that there was a conspiracy involved, right? But it's not convincing enough to put a man in jail over it, like that specific man.
Yeah. And I mean, that's usually what it's so wild to me, again, to go back to what we were talking about earlier of this, the current culture is obsessed with definitives, like the fact that you have to succeed or fail at the goal you set out to do and not thinking so much about the whole of what happens when you run a trial like this. Like a lot of the lawsuits against Donald Trump also are to disclose evidence to make sure that it is recorded and that you have evidence in public court and on public record of things that Trump has done so that people know it. So even if those cases are thrown out, the evidence is still completely on record and administered in that way. And in a similar fashion, here we go. Like, hey, the Zapruder film, it's approved now. It can be seen by people, and here's what it looks like. And Clay Shaw may not go to jail, but Clay Shaw wasn't the target. It's kind of that, like, we're trying to talk to something bigger. We're trying to expose information that leads the American public and just like anybody else who's looking to these conclusions of, what you were told isn't exactly what happened. We don't know really what happened, but there's more here that we need to look at, that we need to demand, and that we need to seek out. So it's fascinating to me too that a lot of people fixate on the guilty or not guilty verdict to talk about like some other courtroom dramas. We have, God, I just lost it. I keep thinking of 12 Angry Men, and it's not 12 Angry Men because that is very much like there's the reasonable doubt and how you kind of sell somebody on like what the information is you're given. But there is some other courtroom drama I'm thinking of, and it'll eventually come back to me. But
A Few Good Men.
It might be A Few Good Men. I don't know. It is one of those things where you want to get the stenographer to write it down. Like that's really what it is like once you get in the court record, Once you have it there, then you can make, a Rick and Morty animatic about it or whatever the fuck that is. There's those bits, but and I think that towards the end of this, just watching the court trial go down, the moment that the Zapruder film is produced, you can tell if you're somebody who has no context of American history, of why this could have been a big deal, what this even is. The way it's delivered in the filmmaking is a gigantic reveal.
Oh yeah. And the way they gasp is really good. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just those bits that tell you this is a big fucking deal for us as a society, as a culture.
Yeah.
Here's what is important, that this piece of evidence is released. There's not a big hoopla about, well, Clay Shaw didn't go to jail. They don't make a whole 20 minutes of it's not like Dirty Harry where they're like, God damn it, this one guy got away because of the system and that kind of shit. It is much more, we got to see what we wanted to see. And you have this interview with, one of the jurors saying there's definitely something else fucking going on here. That is the whole point of the film.
Yeah. I guess what I'm thinking is that the leaps here aren't necessarily challenged. Michael Rooker, his character kind of brings up a little bit of it, and kind of everybody else just boos him down.
Until he's dismissed.
Yeah, everyone else just boos him down. But it in the same...
He
kind of gets shot down and then he quits.
Dismissed in the filmic language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then he comes back and maybe tries to kill Jim Garrison.
Unclear. But the Zapruder film is I think that's a good point around the Kennedy assassination. I think kind of that gets to what my thoughts are, that if in the movie, they're like, hey, we got this thing, the Zapruder film, and the government covered this up. And Garrison jumps to this insane conclusion of they covered it up because this gives the exact, this opens up the hole and all of these things. They couldn't let the public see it. And if Michael Rooker is or they didn't want the public to see their beloved president's head blown to fucking smithereens. Maybe they just thought the public didn't need to see that, didn't need to stay upset, right? Didn't need to look in the casket afterwards. They needed to get closure and move on. That's the more simple example. Sure, maybe it's even more than that, but to jump to this one crazy side versus the other, and then you can have Garrison be yeah, but as a DA with all of this thing, I know if I throw the crazy thing out, the jury will come back a little bit from that. If I just give them a simple explanation, then they'll just eat it, and it might not be enough, or they'll doubt it, and it might not be enough. But I've given the furthest fucking thing possible to jump to, they're going to end up coming back somewhere in there and question it way more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think on that point, I think in a functioning democracy, which we don't have, but it's reliant upon the public knowing what's going on, right? And the government should not be, I don't care what their motive is, the government should not be hiding information from the public, like a mother and a fragile child, right? We need to get that information. We need to see the footage. We need to know what's going on so that we can actually vote and run our country the way we want to, right? When the government is hiding information from the people, it's not a democracy anymore. And it's whatever military blob that's running everything just is, the deep state, which used to be a leftist term and now has been co-opted by Trump. And if you say deep state, people think you're a MAGA person, but that used to be a leftist term for a long time. But the people who run things behind the scenes, when Joe Biden falls asleep and we need to figure out what to do, that's who's running the country. The people that we don't elect, who are there just making decisions on what's okay for the American public to see and not see. I just said Nazi.
Yeah, you did. You did say Nazi. Wow, what a coincidence! We didn't even talk about that final statement about. I know, Ryan, you said that the last statement made, or the closing arguments was schmaltzy stuff, but it. Pretty fucking compelling schmaltzy stuff.
Yeah.
In that whole kind of bit of what do we yield to when we just kind of blindly accept what we are given, and that being fascism. There is a nugget, a kernel of truth in that of, like when we ally, you talk about a tragedy that everybody can unite behind. It's Kennedy's head being blown out and then being shown that Lee Harvey Oswald is the fucking killer. In press, in media, like all that, I don't care about whether or not they had all the biographical details before, any of that stuff. It is the case that like the moment you start profiling somebody as having done the crime before they've served their time or they've done their due process, you have these moments of the American people just being like, yeah, fuck this person. And you see it in this movie. There are moments where people are like, yeah, fuck that guy. Like, he killed the president. And other people being like, he should be given a medal. I got to give it to Oliver Stone for at least representing
those bar
what
scenes
is probably
a
real bar patron being pissed off about or pissed on about these things. I don't know those opinions. But like, you think about when we talked about Hedwig and the Angry Inch and I randomly brought up 9/11 for some reason. There's just that moment of like, you have a rallying cry and everybody gets behind it and they all believe it and they all go. And I've been thinking more and more about Verhoeven's Starship Troopers and the meteor that they send, the bugs. They sent a meteor to kill off all these people. And now you have to stand up and fight for your right. And like, everybody just accepts it. The only good bug is a dead bug. That's kind of what we need to do. And so it complicates so many other matters where people could start spouting other things. The difference now between when Kennedy was assassinated is we have the fucking internet and everybody's able to put their fucking brain immediately onto the wire and let you know what they think and how Trump it's part of a staged coup. Like there's some other thing that's going on with his assassination attempt. It's part of this fucking political campaign. And it just muddles so much more. And I feel like it's all a literacy problem. Everybody doesn't fucking know anymore how to actually assess facts, how to look at
it's also really hard to assess facts now.
Yes.
Like, it's actually a lot more difficult than it ever has
it's
been.
These things where like, one, it's hard to assess facts because you can just saturate an entire environment with information. And two, it's hard to believe facts because when somebody starts criticizing you or your process of thought, it's usually done through this like very myopic lens of like, you fucking thought you could do that? I don't think you can do that thing. Like, fuck you. You don't know what you're talking about. And I have this adage that I've developed where I'm like, I really just wish that we could go to the library together and pull out some books because it's so much more of a slow pace to discover this information and talk about it in a way that the human brain can really process versus fuck you, I'm going to send you a link to an article that you're not going to read. And then you're going to be pissed off at me for trying to shoot at you about how you're full of shit. So yeah, there's just those moments in this movie that I feel like it captures perfectly when it talks about like these theories. It explores this aspect of it, but towards the end when it ramps up in pace, I feel like it kind of loses that mark. And we've talked it to death at this point. Sorry, Kennedy. Like that it only serves to tell you should doubt. Okay. Doubt should be okay is my ultimate message from this movie, whether you believe or not and what has happened, whether you're a subscriber to the military industrial complex, which it opens with a message from Eisenhower about that. And in a very, compelling narrative way. The core premise at the end of it is that you should doubt. And from what I've seen in my rabbit hole diving into JFK theories and other things, I've seen people try to disprove Oliver Stone outright. Like I watched a video where one dude was like, Oliver Stone, I'm going to prove he's an asshole. And he said it that way.
Well, that's probably not hard.
Yeah, it's probably not hard. But then that dude was like, JFK, they said he was shot from the 6th floor. So I got a cherry picker and I put myself up there with a rifle. And here's this shit. And I was like, dude, what are you really doing for the conversation? You're just, You have a
He's
vendetta.
directing it at himself.
Yeah, apparently so. And it's just like, all right, cool. And he did what he set out to do. And then he was like, it's true. I assert that true is true. And there we go. And he dusted his hands off. But like,
using a modern AR-15.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's just one of those things where I'm like, all right, man, come on. Like, what are we really trying to do here? The thing is not Oliver Stone is an asshole. It's like when Cuties came out on Netflix. I'm on a real tear here.
Oh boy.
And Ted Cruz was like, fuck Cuties. It's written and directed by a bunch of pedophiles. And, but like all of the behind the scenes shit was like, we had psychological counselors on set for the girls, and we did all these things, and it was really supposed to draw attention to the fact that a lot of media is really sexualized and it's labeled as for kids too, and like what does that do to them?
Ted Cruz successfully removed it from the public library.
He did.
It's not there anymore.
Yeah, Ted Cruz also successfully posted porn to his Twitter account.
Yes, he did.
But it was an intern. As he claims. So, yeah, there's just those moments where it's like, when you watch the movie, when you watch the fucking content of it, are you missing the mark? Like, think about that. When you accept the actual narrative from the government, are you missing the mark? Like, think about that. That's the rhetoric I get from Oliver Stone's JFK.
And I think too, like you talk about the, how it's difficult to ascertain facts now, and you have all these conspiracy theories. Like, a lot of that branches from the JFK assassination because the government has lied to us, right? Like whether, again, like we don't know what happened, but we know that the government narrative is a lie at this point, right? That's like pretty well established. And like that has led to crazy 9/11 conspiracy theories that have no basis in fact, right? That has led to a lot of other stuff that or like Bush lying about WMDs, right? Like there's been consistent government lies, Watergate, like over the years that have led to, Iran-Contra, all these things that have created this environment in the populace where like we can't trust our government anymore. And so then it leads people down crazy rabbit holes, and they come out the other side and it's like, wait a minute, how the fuck did you get over there? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But it all starts with our government not being honest with us, right? And like I think it's a really interesting film from that perspective too, of like why are we the society that we are today? In large part, it's because of the JFK cover up.
It is, yeah.
Like,
and
who watches The Watchers?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a good takeaway from the movies. Stone gives the argument like to not trust. It's easy to fall in the trap though of going that too far. But I'm like, it's in the same vein of like, you grow up, your parents told you there was a tooth fairy, and then you realize that doesn't fucking make any sense. And you do have to look back now, and you're now open to maybe my parents weren't right about things. Maybe my teachers weren't right about things. They were surely fucking confident they were, but maybe they weren't, right? And that's a certain like growing up and becoming an adult. And this is the same way. But do you jump to like they were robots that were like secretly programming me and I was a DNA clone of this, right? Like it's that leap of like, oh, because of not the tooth fairy, this insane thing, right? That's like a logical
Everything
jump.
else is fair game.
Yeah. And I think that.
But like I think like I empathize with people who get there, right? Because it's such a like we're in an environment where you just can't trust the central narrative anymore. Like you have to fact check everything, and you have to really be careful about determining what sources you trust and what you don't in order to understand the world in a way that you think makes sense. And like not everybody's fucking built that way, like that's really difficult. Like I try, I don't know if I'm successful at it. I try to find media sources that I trust and to like understand the country and the world in a way that I think makes the most sense based on everything that I know. But people think that I'm crazy, and like everybody thinks everyone else is crazy, right? Like that's part of the problem too. Like you end up with your own specific set of sources and worldview, and then anybody who differs from that slightly, you're like, well, you're fucking insane. And like, we're at this point where we can't really have conversations with people anymore because everybody is so siloed into their own little groups. And like, yes, you have the MSNBC and the Fox crowd, but there's so many other little fragments all around that are all different and all think they are the only ones that know the truth of what's actually going on. And it leads to like a tendency toward conspiracy and craziness, and like, you know, I mean, like conspiracy theories are just a mainstream thing that everyone does now, right? Like fucking, like if you watch MSNBC at all during the past 5 to 10 years, you probably believe that Donald Trump conspired with Vladimir Putin to be elected in 2016, right? Like it's full of shit. Like it didn't happen. And like, there's just so much, you know, there's so many vast conspiracy theories that like, it's not a niche thing anymore. Like we're in a world where it's just all over the place, and it's so hard to just parse the shit and figure out what's going on in the middle. It's like almost not possible anymore.
Bringing it back around to your original, like, we had a recent assassination attempt in this assassination. So bringing it back around to that, there's an interesting, like I heard this as a kid, and I don't remember who said it, and I can't fucking find it anymore. But there was this idea of how like media changed, that when Lincoln was assassinated, it took like a week for the United Kingdom to find out about it.
Yeah.
Right, because you had to like type it out, put it on a fucking boat, and sail it over there for them to find out.
And maybe that boat didn't make it, and then you had to send another one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's the two generals problem, John.
Oh, Jesus.
and then it's like by the time you get to Reagan, it's like an hour before they found out. Like it was like JFK, it was like the next day, right? And that was part of like in this, the government had time to like figure out the narrative.
Found out before.
Well, yeah, apparently they did. But look, the government had this time to figure out the narrative before the word really got out for JFK. But by the time it was Reagan, it was like within the hour. But now I'm like, now I can think back at that and be like, and with Trump, we watched it. It wasn't like it was within the hour we found out.
Everybody in the country knew within 5 minutes.
Yeah. And it wasn't presented to us from any source. It was presented to us from every source, right? Like it's a completely different thing. And somehow, when I heard that anecdote as a kid, it was like, hey, this information is so much faster. It's more relevant. Like, look where we've come from. And now I'm like, oh, it's too fast. It's so fast that no conclusion can be made. It's just like,
well, that was like when they said like, okay, the great thing about that information is you can get it as fast as possible. Great. Awesome. But also, what the fuck is that information? Like, that's what the fast part is, right? Like parsing it, like how the Washington Post or other articles were like, loud pops heard near fucking Donald Trump. You're like, what the fuck does that mean? And then it slowly shifted into
a child with pop rocks very close to the microphone.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, what are the fucking loud pops? Are they firecrackers? Like Trump hit the floor. Oh, now his ear is bleeding. And that information, as it continues to evolve, is codified and solidified. And that's kind of where the sort of meddling of the government comes into play in when you think about like trying to shape a narrative. In JFK's, they had a lot more time to work with what they needed to be like, okay, this is kind of what the narrative is to lead the public in a certain way and to get them off of our case when we're trying to figure out more of these details. You have like investigations now. There's fucking some wild shit in Austin. Supposedly a serial killer is off on Rainey Street killing people. And like you have articles where people are like, the police are fucking lying about it. They've debunked several of these claims, but at the same time,
you got other people saying that it's like, just drunk dudes pissing in the lake and
exactly,
falling
face forward. Yeah, and there's just those bits where you're like, what is actually fucking happening? And they're like, we can't disclose time. If we were investigating, we couldn't disclose because we don't want to give away information. And like,
but at the same time, we know they fucking knocked on Jeffrey Dahmer's door like 9 times, right? Like we know that they
just ignored it. Like
there's
those bits where you're like, well, what is that? And that's that little nugget of doubt where it's like, well, why are you not telling me something at least that goes beyond that to say that like we have suspicions that these things we do this stuff and like whatever. It's fascinating to try to look at the way that information has a similar ebb and flow to time. There is kind of this essence of it where it's like we need to stretch it or we need to shrink it, and how much of it is delivered at one point in time or how much of it can be delivered in order to shape how people react to it, because everybody's not coached in the same way to go, loud pops heard, must be fireworks. Other people are like, loud pops heard, that's fucking gunshots. Like you have that kind of difference between decades, and it's wild to think about it.
Well, I think
there's no...
The information does have to be parsed. Like, information gets parsed. And I think that while the legal system is just a myriad of problems, the concept is we do need to slow down, right? Yeah. Humans will jump to that. They jump to the mob. There's so many times we've seen, even before American history, where the mob makes up its mind and murders somebody and they had no fucking right to, and had nothing to do with anything, right? And that's where, whatever Tommy Lee Jones says in Men in Black, it all comes together. The Men in Black, Tommy Lee Jones. But he says, what does he say? He's like, a person can be smart. But he's like, people are dumb.
People are dumb.
People are dumb, right? They like make these rash decisions. And he's like, it can become a mob. And there is that, right? Of like, I think the information now comes so fast that it allows people to be dumb and make all these conclusions. And then it's hard to pull that back. Like, you can slow it down early, right? But then the longer it is, the more you can down it, right? Like, there's this weird rubber band effect of like, well, if we sit and we're really slow and control it, then someone has the ability to completely control it. And so you want to be open. But then if it's completely open, then it's fucking fair game for everything, right? Like,
well, but like the openness is only the information that is easily attainable, right? Like, the government and the police are still not giving us the like core information that we really need, right? And so, but you get all this information very quickly, and then you have people that misconstrue it. And like when Trump got shot, my first instinct was like, oh shit, like what? I assumed there was some conspiracy in what's going on, and like it's like, oh, there was a sniper conveniently positioned on a roof 130 yards away that was just happened to be just outside of the perimeter, even though it was the only building around. And like, how come they didn't, like, people were yelling out and pointing to him and the Secret Service wasn't doing anything about it until after the shots? And I was like, shit, like the Secret Service wants Trump dead. Like, what happened? Like, but like, that's where my mind jumps to, right?
It's because he grabbed that wheel when he was when they were driving him away.
But like, I don't think we don't have enough information to know what happened right now with the Trump assassination attempt. I think it is very telling that no one seems to be trying to really figure out what was going on with this kid, right? It's like, oh, he was a weird white kid who was bullied and owned together. Oh, it's classic school shooter mentality. He was just a weird loner. And then we just kind of dust our hands off and it's done, right? And like, there's, thankfully the fucking head of the Secret Service was finally pressured into resigning because Jesus Christ, I fucked that up so badly. But like, like there's not... there seems to be just a lack of interest in actually figuring out what happened with this kid and how he got up there, why he was up there, what his motivations were, why the Secret Service didn't do anything. And I think part of that is because, like we put out the narrative, oh, it's a school shooter. That's something people understand and are familiar with. And they're like, oh yeah, that's just like what happened to my Walmart last year, and it's like that narrative is so visceral in people's minds and so upsetting that it's like, oh yeah, okay, that's just what it is. That's what our country is now, and that sucks, but it is what it is. But we're not digging further into what's happening. And I think the other part of it is that just the news cycle goes so quickly. And Trump gets shot, Biden drops out of the race. Kamala Harris is undemocratically put up into the head of the party now, and
this guy fucks a couch. Like, we've got to just move on.
Right. It's all happening.
It's all just being thrown at you.
Kamala picks a vice president and all this stuff. Like, we've already forgotten that Trump got shot in the head, right? Like, it's so wild that we just have all moved on as a society to the craziness on the Democratic side now, and how like there was a kind of a coup that happened over there, right? Where they Obama and Pelosi and all the bigwigs forced Biden out and replaced him with their preferred candidate, right? Like,
and we're not getting that conversation, right? It happened and no one says why, right? They're just like, he's out and that's it. You don't need to talk about it any further. Yeah.
And like during the Democratic primary process, nobody wanted Biden, but the Democratic Party was literally not running primaries in a lot of states, and they were just anointing Biden. We're just giving all our delegates to Biden. And there were some, like Texas did have a primary. I voted for Marianne Williamson because I was just like, fuck it, like Biden is terrible. Like, we need somebody else in here. And but they weren't allowing debates. They weren't doing anything to allow the democratic process to naturally occur. And so you have somebody who is just like fake elected to the nomination and then replaced by elites in the party that just have no connection to the democratic voting base at all. And like, we're in a position where, we're just all sitting here watching while the powers behind the scenes are creating our government for us. And like, it feels very much like JFK. Like, there are these factors behind the scenes that are just playing us all like a chessboard, and we're just pawns just watching it all happen around us.
Well, don't worry. J.D. Vance will be out before you know it, and they won't talk about that either. No, I think there's in my mind, a good explanation of why we're not following up on the Trump assassination. And is it like both sides don't want to go any further into digging into it? Like, I think that's the best reason that this isn't a conspiracy that one of the sides put together, is that neither side wants to touch it, where there should be one that's like, hey, this was pushing our narrative, but it's like both of them are like, no, this doesn't push either of our narratives. We don't want to be anywhere fucking near this. Right. One side's like, it makes Trump look like people want to kill him, and it makes us look a little crazy to keep calling him out and saying he's Hitler or whatever, because then it leads to violence, which we were saying was the problem. And the other side is like, we don't want to talk about guns. People can fucking get guns and do crazy shit. Yeah. And that he was, he was a Republican and he's a white guy, and that's fucking always the white guys that shoot people.
VP pick as a couch fucker.
Right. And so like both sides want to move on. So that's exactly the same. I feel like the same thing with the Kennedys. Like, no, we just want to move on. We don't want to talk about that. We want to move on. Even Trump doesn't.
I don't know if I agree with that
though,
because like Trump is not part of the uniparty, right? Like, and I feel like the biggest force in national politics is the uniparty, right? It's the group that just wants to go to war all the time and not fund any public programs. It's the Reagan, Bush, Clinton combo that is just like neoliberalism and neoconservatism. We're gonna like defund all the public programs. We're going to fight all the wars. We're going to increase the national debt. We're going to do all these things. And Trump is outside of that. I don't think Trump has successfully like really governed outside of that and done the populist things that he said that he wanted to do, right? Like, he didn't open any factories in America.
He has no aspirations to do so.
He has the attention span of a squirrel and whatever. He can't actually
the last person that said something to him.
He is a variable that the uniparty doesn't want to deal with, right? And like, if they don't really care, right? The powers that be don't really care whether it's Kamala Harris or like a George Bush type, right?
Or
it
an RFK
matter.
Jr.
But maybe, I don't know. RFK is an interesting character. I have a lot of problems with RFK, but if he got elected, I would be like, oh man, he would release the files. He would put the JFK files out there. But Trump is somebody that kind of everyone hates, and the Republican powers that be go along with it because they get them elected, and they can enact some of their agenda while he's in power. But I don't think
he's
like
a conduit to power.
Yeah. They saw him as this easy tide to get behind. Their main goal is undo things, and it's easy to undo things, so they just needed somebody there to be there enough that they can vote to undo things.
Yeah.
We want to deregulate. We don't know what, but we want to deregulate.
All of it. Yes, exactly.
Let's continue towing the Reagan line.
Republicans are just anarchists.
It really is the case. We've gotten so far off the rails. We're going to have to put this on like a cutting floor Patreon exclusive.
The Patreon episode.
Jesus.
Yeah, on the Patreon, you can hear the original 4-hour cut.
Yes, exactly. Where Dixon does the Louisiana accent.
We're through the looking glass here, people. It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma.
Well, to bring it around though, so I will say the fact that this movie can get us to this, and there are so many other JFK movies and things out there that don't do what this does.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, like it does the right things to hit all the notes for all sides. Because it does open up enough questions, because it presents them compellingly, because it has every fucking actor that it could possibly find in a moment's notice in any possible scene, none of which work for scale. Like, they all fucking just donated time to be around this movie because they were that interested in it. It does make something, right? It really does make something, and makes you
this is one of the most fascinating scripts that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Right. Just from a holy shit, like, this pulls you into the story and makes you like really invested and fascinated in what's going on. For 3.5 hours, you're on the edge of your seat. Like, oh my God, what is it? This is so fucking wild.
I've never seen exposition delivered as succinctly and yet still so massively as this does grip me and actually have me sit back in my chair and be like, holy fuck, what are we talking about here? Come on.
There are a couple movie things that I do want to address before we close this.
Please.
Kevin Costner. So I think I have a lot of the same problems that you do with Costner, John. I think for the most part, he just is Kevin Costner. He doesn't really know how to act. He just kind of is what he is.
Yeah.
The New Orleans accent. Jim Garrison did not have a Cajun accent like that.
Not at all.
I have seen interviews with Jim Garrison. Also, Jim Garrison is in the movie, playing
As
Earl
a judge,
Warren,
right? Yeah,
yeah.
He plays the Warren
and he
Commission,
just has like this deep voice with like maybe a slight Southern twang, but not a lot. And I don't know why Costner decided to go full Cajun with this, but it's weird. I don't know why. And it comes and goes. It's not great.
Just like any other accent he ever tries.
Yeah, I don't know why he decided to do that, but I think he is very compelling in the role, like as the naive, pure American spirit, right? Of the person who views the country as this idealistic place that like, hey, like we deserve to know the truth here. And like, this is America. This is a democracy. We need to get this information. If the government is lying, everyone needs to know. It's like the child in Sunday school who believes everything is supposed to be how it is and is just so shocked and disturbed when he finds that it's not. Like, that's fucking me. That's me. And I was just like, oh my God, like I bought his performance a lot. And like at the same time being like, I know that accent is not great. He's not like doing this as well as maybe another actor could in certain ways, but in other ways it's like, oh man, like, and I feel like the movie almost needs a Kevin Costner like figure at the center to sell itself, right? Because you need somebody who America trusts and loves in order to be able to convincingly tell a story like this, right? About how America is super fucked and there's this massive conspiracy going on, right? You almost have to have somebody like that in the central role to pull this off. And I think like this is probably Costner's best work that I have seen. I haven't seen all of his movies, but I've seen a lot of stuff with Kevin Costner, and I was pretty impressed with his role in this, despite my general Costner concerns.
I mean, that is, yes, you've summed it up quite nicely. Kevin Costner is the American apple pie that needs to spoil for this film to actually have gravity. That's the reason why he went on to fund his stupid fucking Westerns. But like, it is one of those moments where like I said at the beginning of this, it won me over to Kevin Costner because I've seen plenty other Kevin Costner films. Never thought the man really deserved any time on the screen. But this time around, I was like, oh, I get it. He has some piece of soul, some piece of that. He has
that like Jimmy Stewart earnestness.
Exactly. It's that. And I was like, oh, fuck. Okay, this is what Kevin Costner is meant to do.
Mm-hmm.
He's meant to have his soul shattered on screen.
Exactly.
For everybody
Stop
else
making
to see.
sports movies, Kevin Costner. Do more of this kind of weird shit.
For the love of God, stop building it. They keep coming and we can't stop them. Anyway.
Yeah, it's easy for a district attorney to come off as like smarmy or self-serving or whatever, right? And many actors probably wouldn't have been able to pull it off. And Costner does give, something that you can follow. It is interesting. The older you get, the more you're like, why did anyone ever have this narrative that we could trust our government? Like, was this really the breaking point of us trusting our government? How did we ever trust it at any point along the way? But it is interesting, like for the narrative, it fits very well. And he does a good job of being, that Mr. Smith who believed in it, found the corruption, walks away broken, but maybe made a dent.
Yeah.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was Kevin Bacon and that conversation at the prison.
Yes. Oh my God. Are you the same thing that I'm thinking about?
I think so.
It's ironically funny.
Oh my God. Oh, one of the funniest scenes of the movie where Costner and Michael Rooker are grilling Kevin Bacon, who is in prison, like at a work camp. And he's so excited to talk to them because he doesn't have to just like dig holes in the ground in the hot sun all day. He gets to come and sit under a tree in the shade and talk to them about Clay Shaw, Clay Bertrand, and David Ferry, and all these people, all the fucking that was happening in the homosexual underworld of New Orleans. And then he tells them, Costner's like, that like there's going to be a lot of people that come out against what you're saying, and like, you know, are you really willing to come to trial with this and to testify? And he's like, absolutely, I'm willing to testify because the people need to know fascism is coming back. And that's why he was killed. And we need to know that fucking communist, that's why he was killed, because he was destroying this country. And we've got to bring fascism back to America. And Costner's just sitting there like, oh fuck. I have to bring this guy to this fucking Nazi to the stand. This gay Nazi prostitute to be my key witness in this trial. Exactly no one is going to believe him.
And the whole time that he talks about how like, oh, the blacks all voted for him, while all of the black prisoners do the labor around him was it was just so like, oh God, the irony was so biting. It was fucking crazy.
I love that scene. And then building off of that, I'm curious as to like who your favorite side character was in this movie, because there are so many just batshit crazy individuals that are just so fascinating to me in this film, that come and go throughout the movie as they come into the movie and then maybe get killed off or just disappear or whatever happens. There are so many characters that I absolutely love in this movie. And I'm curious to hear from you guys who your favorites are.
All right, I'll go first. One, John Candy, because
God,
he's John Candy. He looks exactly like the dude that he's portraying. He speaks a little bit more hipper, and
he's like thinks he's a black jazz musician.
Yeah. It's exactly that. It's between him and Ed Asner, just because Ed Asner seems like an elderly patient with dementia, because the way he turns on Jack Lemmon so fast and starts beating him with a pistol is very much like what are you doing in my house? Get out of my house. He just starts fucking, he's like, you're writing a book about me? Yeah, fucking no, you're not. I was like, oh my God, what is happening with Ed Asner? Also the way he turns on like, he just immediately starts expositing anti-Semitism and racism at the same time.
Right away.
I was like, holy shit, Ed Asner is just set up to just do this and spout this. Mm-hmm. It's not that it's like, look, everybody, I don't love anti-Semitism or racism. Just to clarify here, if
glad you're on the record with that, John.
Yeah, I'm very on the record with that. It was just funny how ham-fisted Ed Asner was as a character to me. So yeah, Ed Asner and John Candy, my favorites. Great. Yeah, Joe Pesci did a fucking phenomenal job, but
oh my God,
he's just so out front with it that I was like, all right, Joe Pesci, we all know you're everybody's favorite side character.
Right.
It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, John Candy's definitely a standout. I thought you were going to mention Tommy Lee Jones painted gold.
Oh,
that was pretty
hell
fucking
yeah.
apparently that was
gold.
Yeah, apparently that was his idea. Like, he was like, oh, what you should do is paint me all gold.
Fucking brilliant.
Incredible. It's a foursome where two guys were painted gold and two guys were in like Revolutionary War attire with like wigs and white makeup and shit. I was like, what the fuck is going on?
I dreamed that I was dressed as Icarus and I had been painted gold. And my father went up ahead of me and he started a camp with a fire. And that's where Fairy met with Oswald. And then I woke up. Oh, man. That's my No Country crowd.
I love when Tommy Lee Jones is asked whether he's ever known David Ferry, and he's like, I have clearly never met someone of such ridiculous appearance.
Amazing. Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you on all of those. Joe Pesci, holy shit, is so good as David Ferry. That wig... Just it keeps moving on his head. It's right. It's shots of the same scene. It'll be like down on his eyebrows and then like pushed way back up his head. It's like he's like adjusting it like a hat as he's going on throughout the day and sweating and shit. And like I love his Cajun accent. It's just like seeing Joe Pesci, who I cannot picture as being from anywhere but New York, being a Cajun New Orleans guy. Like I loved it. And he's just like, he seems like he's on cocaine all the time.
Yes.
Just like fucking running around screaming.
He lights like 18 cigarettes in that first scene.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Like when he's fearing for his life and meets Costner at the hotel and he's just pacing around, just yelling all this shit and just like, it's so good. And then, John Candy, holy, like he seems like he's on weed all the time in the movie. And just like, His accent is so good. Like that's probably my favorite Cajun accent of the movie is John Candy. He's like, "Hey, Daddy-O, you're barking up the wrong tree, you dig?" Like it's just so fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
Just, oh man. Yeah, and I don't know. Just every little side character is just fucking insane, and they were all real people, and it's just absurd to me.
So good.
Fine, cool. Any other final thoughts on this massive film before we wrap this up?
I'm morbidly curious what Adam McKay would think about this.
Oh, I bet he loves this movie.
Yeah, I bet he does. I bet he
Mm-hmm.
has notes, but I bet he loves this. It's just like having seen Vice and all that stuff. I'm like, yeah. I know I said Tarantino earlier, and that's because I would love to see Tarantino do this because McKay would do it.
McKay would do a worse version of this.
Yeah.
It would still be good, but it would be a worse version of this.
Yeah. So I would know. But anyways, that's my final thought.
All right. Ryan, any final thoughts?
I mean, I think we've covered it. It is interesting cutting this movie down. It fills its time slot. You know, we mentioned that. It did make me think, talking about like conspiracies and being on the edge of your seat. Killers of the Flower Moon. Also, you don't feel its length either because you're so gripped with like, really? Yeah. Like every step of the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good comparison. That's interesting. Ryan, would you recommend this movie?
I would recommend it. I think, you know, I'm really conflicted with the just like the presentation and continuation of something that like pushes people to believe conspiracies that are a little too far gone and defend them just because there's like one problem in something that opens up this complete, you know, way too far off of it. But the movie does a good job at what it sets out to do. Very well acted, tons of great people in it. The way it's directed, the way they fit things together, the locations, like shooting on those locations, like there's a lot of it as a movie that's made really, really well and really, really compelling. I personally got lost in that, like, just because you can't explain this one thing of science, thus Earth is a round disc, like leap.
Yeah.
But you know, if you can come open-minded and leave open-minded, and like don't leave like concluding something, like leave open-minded, then I think you're in a good spot.
I think that's good life advice generally, Ryan.
Yeah, totally.
Whatever you're coming to, come in with an open mind, leave with a maybe even more open mind.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. John, would you recommend this movie?
Oh, absolutely. I would. There's, you know, obviously, as I've said, there's a bit of qualifier of if you're going into it, just like Ryan said, go in open-minded, leave open-minded. Like, don't try to look for one narrative that somebody else tells you in a very persuasive film, because otherwise you're going to watch Assassin 33 AD or God's Not Dead and leave with the wrong message, everybody.
Oh my God, there's time travel?
Wow, I can use it to my own ill advantage.
Go back in time and kill Jesus. Oh, wait, that already happened.
Oh, wow. It's different when the Muslims do it. So. A disclaimer for everybody out there: fucking being sardonic and sarcastic here. Come on, like don't
Sardonic.
think that I am. Sardonic is my new phrase. Thank you, Dixon. You coined my trademark. Nobody use it.
You're welcome.
But yeah, I would recommend this film. I think that it is expertly edited, wonderfully directed, even with so much exposition, which I'm used to as a master of schlock, where people just have to get their fucking words on screen.
But you can do exposition well, and Oliver Stone has proved that with this movie.
That is correct. Exposition should
it's
not
hard
be
to
a
do it
dirty
well,
word.
but you can.
Exposition should not be something that is shamed as a mechanism. It needs to be used well, and Oliver Stone does it. So I would recommend. Dixon.
All right. Yes, I would highly recommend this movie. I gave it 5 stars on Letterboxd. I think it's really
5 stars.
Quite
wow.
excellent. Yeah. I think from a filmmaking perspective, it's kind of perfect the way that it all comes together. Like, my only qualm with it is that some of the scenes with Costner's kids are a little bit too on the nose, and those child actors are bad.
Yes.
But that's a very small part of the movie. I think everything else from a filmmaking standpoint is just fascinating. The way they build this story over the course of the movie. The director's cut is 3 hours and 26 minutes, and it fucking flies by. Like it's amazing that he's able to make a film that is so digestible yet so long. I actually saw an interview with Stone that he said he wanted to put an intermission in the movie, but theaters wouldn't agree to do it. And he actually had some theaters, I think in Europe, that were agreed to show it with an intermission, and that the audiences seemed to like it more because they had more time to digest the information, because there's so much information that's thrown at you during the course of the film. Like if you could stop halfway through and think about it for 15 minutes and then go into the second half of the film, you know, and kind of gather your thoughts a little bit, I think that is probably helpful. But this is my second watch. I liked it better than the first time that I saw it. I think it's a really fascinating movie that says a lot about America and who we are as a society in 1963 and 1991 and today. Also, going to tack on, I would recommend 7 Days in May, that I think is a very interesting pairing with this, as well as Oliver Stone's documentary from 2022, where he kind of builds on what he talks about in JFK and gets into very specific scientific details about a lot of the questions that are raised in JFK. There's a 2-hour cut, JFK Revisited. I have not seen that. I've seen the 4-hour cut, JFK Destiny Betrayed. I have it on Blu-ray, so it has both. I don't know how easy it is to find online to find the 4-hour cut, but I would imagine that the 2-hour cut, JFK Revisited, is probably good also, but just not as detailed.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. You know, like there are little minor things that are just like 2 seconds in the movie that are just delved into in really deep ways in the documentary that are really interesting to see. So I would very much recommend JFK, as well as, you know, those pieces as well. 7 Days in May from a historical standpoint, I think is fascinating. And then the modern day documentary that Stone made 2 years ago. So I think it's a really great film. And I think just with everything that's going on in the country right now and the attempted Trump assassination, it's a fascinating piece to dive into and discover. So cool. Well, thank you guys for joining us on this crazy rant of a sidetrack of an episode.
This episode was wild.
I have been your host, Michael Dixon. With me, as always,
Ryan King. I mean, it just adds up. Them boys are in Texas. They talk about movies. Movies come from books, book depository. It all lines up.
One of them boys is from Dallas.
Yeah. I'm telling you.
Oh, fuck, that's
pictures.
me. Oh, man. And
John Garcia, I don't know what to believe anymore, everybody. It's so fucking wild. I'm going to have to take a lot of time to process and watch more Oliver Stone documentaries, I guess.
John, why did you decide to drive to Texas in the middle of that thunderstorm to go ice skating?
Now, the thunderstorm wasn't so bad. And, you know, we didn't opt to not go ice skating. We actually went duck hunting, but we forgot our guns when we got out there. You know, I remembered when my friends told me.
I can't believe we did this whole episode and no one did a JFK impersonation this whole time. Because he's not in the movie. So
thanks, sir, for putting up with our bullshit. Hey there, movie buffs, TV toughs, and all listeners in between. John here from the Afterthoughts podcast. I just wanted to drop in at the end of this episode and say thanks for listening. If you've got afterthoughts of your own to share, hit us up. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Afterpod, or jump into a conversation on our Discord server. You can find info for this and more at theafterpod.transistor.fm. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.